say, I found out a lot about myself I didn't know. In other words, their backs against the wall, they get hungry, they're under pressure, and they react in certain ways. And I think usually they're positive ways. I think when our backs are against the wall on all sorts of things, whether it's problems in life generally, financial, illness, whatever, that's when we maybe find out how resilient we are, that we probably have many more resources to cope as coping mechanisms than we really appreciate. So I totally agree that perhaps the first thing is to get to know ourselves a bit better. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can think something, say, one evening, for example, if I've been to the cinema and seen a good movie, and I'll give it mentally a score out of 10, I might say, well, it was okay, I'll give it a 6. But I think about it the next day, and I think, actually, that film was really good. So I've changed my mind to an 8, or something like that. Now, it doesn't always happen, as an example, but equally, for example, I like doing crosswords sometimes, and I can look at, I don't look up the answers in the back of the book until I really give up on a clue. So I try and complete them. And again, if I finish doing one or trying one evening, if I happen to be doing that, the next day, and I can't finish it all, the next day, and this often has happened in the past, I go to those clues and I think, oh, that's the answer to that. And the answers come. And I think, well, why couldn't I retrieve that from my brain yesterday? So in other words, maybe as a line in one of my songs, I can't quite remember it. I think it was along the lines, maybe the poem rhymes just for a day. In other words, a poem, if it's a literal poem, any other day it won't be a rhyming poem. It won't really make sense. But on a given day, everything comes together and it works. And maybe our minds are a bit like that. I think we all have a capacity to actually, without realizing it, our minds change a little bit. They think of it differently from one day to the next, sometimes 1 hour to the next. So again, this is all part and parcel of knowing ourselves. Maybe that we can be inconsistent. We probably all believe our views are set on most things, but we can be inconsistent. And maybe that's a good thing, that we're prepared to change our minds about something we've thought about, etc., etc. Okay, that's quite an interesting one. Man can cure a multitude of illnesses, but not fate. Are some events fated to happen, do you think?
Ah, okay. So faith. Um, it, it happened to me once, so I
Mm.
I don't think we've got time for this story, but it's a really good one. It's a really good story because before this time I would have said, nah, fate is rubbish, it's just, I don't believe in it. And well, I still don't believe in fate. But something changed for me. I think it was last week. So Jeanette said to me, she said, oh, I'm having this chest pain. I've been to the doctors and they've sent me for an x-ray. So I said, all right, I'll come and pick you and take you. So I said to her, but I'd already promised a kid in my congregation. I said to him, I noticed that you need a jacket. I said, I'll try and get you a jacket and I'll get it from you at Tesco's. I said, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to come take you and then we'll go to Tesco's and get you this. It was a 17-year-old kid. I said, we'll go there and we'll do, I'll get you a jacket because he had a part at the meeting and he needed a jacket. Anyway, so I said, I'll take you to Tesco's. Anyway, he rang me up that same day and he said to me, he said, oh, um, my mom's just, my mom's just got me a jacket. I'm going to see if it fits. If it doesn't fit, I'm still going to need that one. But if it does, then that's fine. I don't need the one. So I said, all right. I said, oh, that's my trip to Tesco's gone. Ah. So I took Janet to the to have an X-ray done. and it came out clean anyway. The next, I think, 2 days after she got the result. But anyway, and then I said to her, I said, I really needed to get a few things, grocery wise. And she said, "Oh, should we go Aldi?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's where I'm heading." And we're driving. And then she said, "Oh, what about that Tesco's in well, those are Tesco's in somewhere, Great Autumn Road, they call it in Bradford." And I said, "Do you really want to?" She said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I want to go to Tesco." I said, "It's more expensive at Tesco." She said, "Yeah, but that's where I want to go. I've got this, club card thing." I said, all right, I'll take you to Tesco's then." And then it clicked. I thought I was going to go to Tesco. And then that fizzled out.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
somehow I'm going to Tesco's. I couldn't believe it. And I thought about it and I thought, do you know? And I told her the story and she said, "Oh." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Now I'm going to Tesco's." So maybe, maybe
yeah.
maybe, I don't
You just
know.
don't know. I mean, yeah, I've always felt some things are fated to happen. And
Mm,
just a bit of a light-hearted example, but it does seem a good example, related to last weekend's football matches, which no doubt we'll discuss on our football podcast a bit later. But this is quite an interesting thing to do with fate, perhaps. Now, my team, Crystal Palace, very disappointingly, were beaten by Macclesfield in Manchester or near Manchester. I've been to Macclesfield before a few times, and they are in what they call the National League North, about six divisions below Crystal Palace, who are in the Premier League, the top league in the country in England. So the FA Cup game, now the holders of the FA Cup are Crystal Palace from last season. So they went along on Saturday to Macclesfield pretty confident, and we fans were pretty confident that we should beat Macclesfield, so many leagues below us. Well, you may know that Crystal Palace lost that game,
I did.
and Macclesfield thoroughly deserved to win, which is a bit of a one-off, really, in terms of those levels.
Mm.
And yeah, I think we've run out of time, which is a shame
Yeah.
because perhaps I'll just finish that story next week.
Wow,
But
beautiful.
there's a strange twist in that
Wow.
story.
Wow. Yeah. I'd love to hear it because things like this, it's very interesting to discuss. Anyway, so this is all we've got time for. Bruv couldn't finish his story. So join us again next week so you can hear the concluding part of that story. Um, I'm Emmy Hikins and he calls me Cos.
Yeah, and I'm Trevor Gear, and he calls me bruv.
Join us again next week. So goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me too.